Hello, this is Bryson LaFleur coming at you with another tennis improvement video. And today I'm interviewing intergame coach and personal friend of author of the Intergame of Tennis, Timothy Gallaway. His name is Jeffrey Lipsius, and I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. On our previous talks, we had some really great conversations. So I'm really excited to have you on here and get your insights about the inner game. So my first question is, how did you get into the inner game, and what inspired you to be an inner game coach?
Well, as a college tennis player, wanting to get the highest rankings and perhaps go pro, I was working on playing my best at the most difficult points, at the big points, where it's an ad and I'm about to break the guy. And I had to really play a little bit better than I had been through the match. I wanted to find a resource for that. And I noticed that I could practice a forehand and backhand, but how do I practice my mental state? So when a big point comes up, how can I control my inner thought process to be able to play that point as well as I possibly could? And this is all before I heard about the inner game. I decided that maybe meditation was a way to do that. And so I was looking for a way that I would be able to use meditation to be able to control my thoughts and be able to control my uh, inner state, because
Mhm.
after all, if I can practice a forehand and backhand, why can't I practice my mental state? And I did some research. Eventually, I found a meditation practice that has techniques that I could actually practice in the middle of a tennis match and be able to control that. And that was how I first got interested. It helped my game tremendously.
Mhm.
And then the book came out, The Intergame of Tennis. And coincidentally, the author was also a tennis teacher, tennis pro, very accomplished player, had high national rankings. And he did a meditation practice too, and just really crystallized the whole connection between the inner state and peak performance. And it just took things to another level for me. I just had to meet the guy. And so back in the 1970s, I got together with Tim and we became friends. And over the years, I didn't make it in the pros, by the way. So I had to get a real job and I became a salesperson. And then as a salesperson, I ended up being vice president of the company, and I got a hold of Tim and I said, let's apply the inner game principles from your book to sales performance. And that's when Tim and I spent tremendous amounts of time, working out inner game, how it actually works and how it can apply to other things. So I've been in touch with Tim, spending hundreds of hours with him talking about inner game
Mhm.
and its implications over the last 50 years.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting, and just for everybody out there, yeah, the inner game of tennis was a massive inspiration for me too, and how I approached the game and tennis. So and I'd like to go a little bit more into that, how meditation helps you with your tennis and also with the inner game of tennis.
Mhm. Okay, well, we'll start by talking about peak performance. And
Hmm.
if we can call peak performance performing beyond your expectations, where
Hmm.
you hit such a good shot that you're surprised at what a good shot you just hit. That's like peak performance. You can't expect to perform beyond your expectations, just by definition. You can't expect to perform beyond your expectations. So trying to play, to beat the guy, trying to win a tennis match in a lot of ways is actually going to sabotage it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the inner game and you have the outer game. The inner game is your potential as a tennis player, and the outer game is the score. So say I played Andy Murray and he killed me 6-1, 6-0. He won the outer game. He got a better score. But here I am, almost 70, and I got a game off one of the world's best players. I felt like a winner. I played up to my full potential. And even though I lost the outer game and he goes to the next round and I go to the locker room, I won the inner game. I played up my full potential. Now, here's the important part. If I have to trust that if I play up to my full potential, the score is going to take care of itself. And if I focus on getting a good score, I'm actually distracting myself from creating my full potential, from fulfilling my full potential as a tennis player. So peak performance has to be discovered. You can't try to perform beyond your expectations. You have to discover how good you really are. So it's a process of discovery, of being surprised by your own ability. Just like when you were a little child playing tennis and you notice that, now you're hitting the ball, you're getting bigger, you're stronger, you're getting more coordination, and all of a sudden shots that you couldn't hit before, you're improving. It's a surprise. You're learning. You're getting in touch with your potential. That's how we achieve peak performance.
Mm-hmm. And so, what could you go into more about why just trying to win, um, get in your own way or create that interference?
Yeah. Okay. So when we try to win, what's happening is we're focusing on the outside. We're focusing on where the ball's supposed to go. Okay. We want the ball to go over the net and into the court. As a matter of fact, we want it to go to a certain spot on the court. Well, actually, that involves striking the ball a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And once you strike the ball, you're no longer involved. It's going to go wherever it's going to go. So we have to focus as tennis players on the moment of impact. And if you're trying to win a point, you're going to be more focused on where the ball landed. Was it in? Was it out? See, maybe this is when we should get into the talk about self one and self two. Okay, because one of the basic principles of the inner game of tennis, by the way, this is still one of the best-selling tennis books ever. It came out maybe 40 years ago, and to this day, it's in the top 5 year after year of best-selling tennis books. So it's a real classic. Recommend anybody read it. And Bryce, you did a video on inner game of tennis
Mm-hmm.
earlier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the main principles in inner game of tennis is that we have two selves. Okay, self one and self two. And self one is outer, self two is inner. So if you're watching somebody play tennis and they happen to be very frustrated with themselves and they say, "Oh, come on, stupid, step into the ball." If you went up to them and said, "Who are you talking to?" They'll say, "Oh, I'm just talking to myself. I am talking to myself." Who's doing the judging? Well, I am. Who's doing the tennis playing? Myself. Two selves. Self one is like the judicial self, and self two is the somatic, actually the body that's doing the tennis playing. And this frustrated tennis player, self one and self two, are not communicating very well to each other. Now, getting back to my example, self one is going to judge where the ball went, where the ball landed. Was it in the corner, which is where I was aiming? Was it in or was it out? That's self one that's doing the judging. Self two uses a different language. It uses the language of feeling. And to self two, there's no such thing as in or out. To self two, the ball went over there or it went over there. And you, in order to integrate self one and self two, you need to learn the language of self two, which is the language of feeling and awareness and learning rather than teaching. Now, this is where I get into teaching actually interferes with learning, because self two is doing the actual tennis playing. When somebody gives you an instruction, it's not necessarily going to resonate with self two. And so in the inner game of tennis, one of the most interesting principles, one of the most interesting paradoxes in the inner game is that, in fact, teaching interferes with learning. And if somebody gives a tennis lesson, if they're giving a lot of instructions, take the racket back, swing this way, this is how you grip the ball, this is how you follow through, all these instructions to remember, it's interfering with self two's ability to feel what's happening. So an example of this would be the bounce hit drill that Tim Gallaway invented.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it's a way to show tennis players how to improve and how to learn tennis without a single instruction. And the inner game method of teaching tennis accelerates learning tremendously by months or years, simply because not a single instruction is used, because it's completely getting this awareness and the feeling of self two, which is actually doing the tennis playing. So you're bypassing having self one interpret how to hit the ball, what's right and what's wrong. So with bounce hit drill, it's essentially just saying, I want you to notice when the ball bounces on the court and notice when the racket strikes the ball. Say the word bounce at the moment that it bounces on the court, and say hit the moment the racket hits the ball. That's all a beginner needs to do. Believe it or not, and I've seen this demonstrated many times, you don't need to give instructions. As long as you make them aware of where the ball is in relation to the racket, in relation to the court, because they're noticing bounce when the ball bounces and hit when it hits the racket. And there's many inner game exercises like this to accelerate learning, bypassing the need for instruction.
Mm-hmm. So, given that, okay, so I understand. So, the inner game is about sort of getting past that the teaching and getting into self two.
Mm-hmm.
So how I think with a lot of people, the self one is the dominant thing.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really know more than self one, or
Mm-hmm.
at the very least they have awareness of self one and self two, but
Mm-hmm.
their self one is much stronger. So
Mm-hmm.
how do they make the self two more dominant instead of the self one? Is that through meditation? What specifically could they do to bring out that self two?
Well, different inner game drills, maintaining awareness of what's happening rather than judging it. So being able to, at a tennis match, notice that a ball went there or there instead of going in or out, or judging yourself. So what I do sometimes when I notice, for example, my return of serve happens to be off, I'll go back to bounce hit, where I'll say bounce when the ball, and I've had national rankings, so I've been playing tennis for many years at a high level. I still go back to the basics, bounce hit, if I need to recenter my awareness and get out of judgment. And there's many exercises like this. You can make them up. Notice the shape of your swing. Notice the seams of the ball as they're coming toward you. Uh, notice the sound of the racket of when it's hitting the ball. All kinds of different things that's going to bring your awareness to a non-judgmental place where you're looking at
Mm-hmm.
the isness. you know that's what I call it, the isness of what's taking place on the court, rather than judging it, that it's good or bad, or it's not the way it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just getting
Okay.
back to reality of what's taking place, that gives yourself to the data that it needs in order to perform at its highest level.
Uh-huh. And yeah, I think that's a very, very big mindset shift in that I think for instance out is that negative judgment
Mm-hmm.
and in is that positive judgment, but you kind of have to move beyond both because it's not, I mean, maybe you misjudged the ball and
Mm-hmm.
that's the reality of what happened, but that's not necessarily good or bad. You hit it there. You
Mm-hmm.
didn't it's not good or
Mm-hmm.
bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a very, very massive paradigm shift. And I remember that you talked about it's the inner game. A lot of the inner game is about distracting yourself, um, and from self one basically, and that can
Yeah.
get you into self two just
Yeah.
by the nature of itself.
Yeah.
So we are kind of backtracking a little bit, but I'd like you to talk about what what is the inner game approach to learning a new skill, for instance, and could you go into more detail about how, how maybe let's say there's a beginner player, how would he become maybe an advanced player with the inner game method?
Okay. Well, I'll give you an actual example that happened with me, because I learned tennis in the 70s and I had an Eastern grip in my
Mm-hmm.
forehand. And now all the players are using that topspin with the semi-Western or Western grips. And it's a far superior forehand. Now I go to the senior tournaments and all the guys I'm playing with are still using that flat forehand because that's what they learned in their 70s, even though we've all been told that, the new forehand where you hit with lots of topspin is just a superior shot. Nobody changed, even though we've heard it's a better shot. And knowing inner game like I do, I said to myself, well, I'm going to learn the topspin forehand because it's obviously better. So I just decided whatever happens with this new grip, it's not easy to change your grip, especially when you're playing competitively. I'm just going to change my grip, and I'm going to start hitting the ball with topspin, and whatever happens, happens. And because I'm an inner game coach, I just didn't judge myself. It's just, if I'm going to play worse because I'm using a new forehand and a new grip that's totally unfamiliar, then fine. I'll notice where the ball went. Okay, the ball went out, but I'm not going to say it went out. I'm going to say it went over there. And just did that. It took a month or two. But when you think about it, a complete grip change and a complete motion change on a forehand that I've been doing for 40 years before, being able to play competitively in about 2 months better than my previous forehand, that's pretty good. Okay. And I did that because I wasn't invested in hitting the ball in or out. I was just completely dedicated to hitting this new forehand and willing to accept whatever happened and noticing what happened so that it accelerated my learning.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an example?
Uh-huh. You, for instance, let's say you were wanting to develop a topspin forehand. You
Mm-hmm.
just try to hit it with topspin and then
Mm-hmm.
almost let the rest work itself out.
Yeah. You don't try to hit it with topspin. You do hit it with topspin. And whatever happens, happens. As long as you notice what's happening, your body will be able to make the adjustments. But because the other senior players at the tournament weren't willing to just notice what happens and accept it, they're still stuck with flat forehands
Mm-hmm.
because they're judgmental. And in the beginning, obviously, if they switch their grip and they switch their motion, they're not going to play as well. To them, it's like, well, the ball went out. That's bad. I don't want that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So they avoid making a change because they're going to judge themselves to be bad and as a result, they're not improving as a tennis player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I
okay.
have a better forehand than they have.
Uh-huh. My next question is, what is the biggest paradigm shift when it comes to the inner game of tennis philosophy versus, maybe how somebody would be playing conventionally?
The biggest paradigm shift is not trying to win. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to win, it's going to interfere with achieving your full potential as a tennis player. Okay. So let's say I'm talking to somebody as a coach and I'm saying, what do you want to do? Well, I'm trying to win. Okay. I have a way that from now on, you'll always win and never lose another match. All you have to do is make sure that you're always playing with somebody who's worse than you. And you'll always win from now on. You'll never lose again. There, I'm your coach. Did I solve your problem? No, no, I want to get better. I wouldn't improve. It wouldn't be any fun if I know I'm always going to win. So then the paradigm shift is that it's not really about winning. It's about learning and it's about improving. And you see how I just shifted from self one, the judgmental self, to self two, which is the learning self, the potential self.
Mm. Let's say a player's in a match, and in tennis, I think especially with how the scoring works, the
Mm-hmm,
the big points become so much more important than most of the other points because it's
mm-hmm,
sort of like an all or nothing system. Because like a game, once you
mm-hmm,
lost a game, that's it going forward. So I think for many reasons, tennis is a very, very mentally difficult sport. And what would you tell players to handle the tough moments mentally in tennis well, or avoid choking, or avoid playing poorly in high pressure situations?
Well, I think it's best if you don't even notice that it's a big point. Why would you want to play a big point any differently? If you have confidence in yourself, you're just going to play your best at all times. If you notice it's a big point, chances are you're going to choke because the judgment is coming in. And this gets to something, Bryce, that you were saying earlier, which is good judgment is really the same side of the coin as bad judgment. In other words, if you're judging a shot that was really good, you also created the possibility of another shot being not so good. Okay. And what I'm saying here is we want to get out of the paradigm of judgment completely so that each shot is exactly what that shot was. And if we notice what happened as much as possible, then we're empowering ourselves to make the changes we want to get a better result.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And if we're trying to win, and we notice it's a big point, so it's really important what happens, well, that's a thought. And that thought is going to distract us from being able to, like it's a big point and the player is a lefty, has a really great wide serve. And sure enough, the player hits a wide lefty serve and you go, uh-oh, it's the serve it's his best serve. Well, when you say uh-oh, it's going to affect the shot that you hit. You're not going to be as aware. They've done studies where the uh-oh effect in coaching, actually the eye moves a little bit. It takes your eye off the ball. So you have to really be able to look at things in a non-judgmental way to give yourself the opportunity to play at your very best.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe perhaps it's about being bigger than the moment, because you're judging. Okay, I'm judging this, or I'm judging this, but you're not really
Mm-hmm.
immersed in it. So you're almost at the moment's level, or you're smaller than the moment. When
Mm-hmm.
maybe you got an uh-oh shot. So
Yeah.
maybe you're just sort of above it, and then you're just doing what you know you need to do, intuitively.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Letting the moment control you instead of
Uh-huh.
instead of being in the moment.
Yes, yes. Okay. And I did this just kind of popped into my head. But I was wondering, for instance, how do you reconcile the inner game with tactics? So let's say I want to do a pattern,
Mm-hmm.
or let's say maybe my pattern is just out of my, just
Mm-hmm.
random pattern. Maybe you want to go two forehands, then a backhand cross.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How would you do the inner game with that? For instance, what I've noticed is that I'm if I want to do if I'm having a tactic, I need to think about my tactic, but then when the point starts, I gotta kind of be completely clear-minded, or try to relax into it and not think about what I'm doing, because the second I think, that's when I make the error. But I was
Mm-hmm.
wondering your thoughts about that, and how you approach maybe a tactic or a pattern when with the
Mm-hmm.
inner game.
And you're talking about now in a match, not in just a drill.
I mean, it could be a drill too. For instance, with my students, sometimes I say I want them to hit, a certain pattern or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. So it
Yeah.
could be either one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think more specifically
Yeah.
a match, but it could be either one.
Okay. Well, the main thing is not to worry about where the ball landed. Okay. Because once the ball leaves your racket, you're no longer in control of where the ball lands. So thinking in terms of in or out, close to the line, in the corner. That's not going to be helpful.
Mm.
What's going to be helpful with self two is something that has to do with how it felt. Okay. What's going to be the point of awareness? So maybe notice where the ball hit on your racket, or notice the sound that the ball made, during the pattern. I mean, you're hitting the pattern, but you're noticing how it felt, and you're noticing things that your senses pick up on: the sound, the feeling, where the ball hit on the racket, where the ball's, notice the trajectory of the ball as it comes to you. These types of things. That's going to
Mm-hmm.
be most helpful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to giving the person something that they can judge. Oh, it went in
Mm-hmm.
the net. I mean, in the
Mm-hmm.
bounce hit drill that I was mentioning earlier, if the ball goes in the net, you just say bounce. It just counts, just like it hit the
Mm-hmm.
court, just like it hit the net. You don't differentiate bounce and hit depending on where the ball went. It's either a bounce or it's either a hit. And even if you don't hit, even if it's an actual beginner who doesn't make contact with every ball with their racket, you just say hit when you think the racket might have hit the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
completely not judging what takes
Mm-hmm.
place. There's no good, there's no bad. The ball lands either over here or over there,
Uh-huh.
not in
Okay.
or out. Yeah.
Okay. Those same kind of I would say distracting methods. Maybe you have the mental awareness of what you want to do, but you don't want to necessarily judge it when it's happening. Would that be fair to
Right,
say?
right. So, but another way of saying it is that bounce hit or notice the shape of your swing, these types of exercises would be distracting you from your distraction of judgment.
Yes. Okay.
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 So the judgment that the ball went in or out, or that here comes a really hard shot, or uh-oh, it's a backhand, that's judgment. And
Mm.
these exercises, inner game exercises that I'm recommending will distract you from your distraction of judgment.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. I see. All right. I think and all that is some really really good excellent insights on this. I want to shift a little bit to the how the inner game works in a broader sense. So I would like to know your perspective on the inner game and how that relates to self and inner mastery. You talked about meditation. What do you think players or people in general could do to get the best out of themselves and have a bit of just a in general good inner game in life?
Yeah. Well, the beauty of inner game, I mean, it was a book about tennis, but in fact, most of the people that read the inner game and benefited from it were not tennis players. As a matter of fact, it became the birth of the whole sports psychology movement. Tim Gallaway to this day is known as the father of modern coaching. And so inner game has been applied to many things, including personal growth, simply because the principles of peak performance apply universally to all kinds of different activities. Like, because you can't expect to perform beyond your expectations applies to anything. When I became vice president of my company, I had over 100 salespeople under me, and I got a hold of Tim and said, let's apply inner game to selling. We knew we were going to be able to do it. It was just a matter of thinking about the general universally applicable principles and applying to them to my sales force and seeing which ones were going to work and which ones weren't. It turns out that in selling, rather than having self one and self two, it's simply conversation one and conversation two. Conversation two is inner and conversation one is outer. So in conversation one, that's the conversation between the customer and the salesperson. All tennis, not tennis, but selling schools are focused on conversation one. They're focused on improving your interaction with your customer. It's just like most tennis teaching is involved with self one. It's instruction. You take the ball back, you take the racket back, you step into it like this. This is how you should be striking the ball. This is where you follow through. It's all instruction based. It's outer. So both tennis instruction is outer and selling instruction is outer. This is how you handle objections. This is how you make you get their trust. This is how you make them think you're smart. Selling was forgetting the inner game, which is conversation two, which is the decision process going on between the customer's ears. The salesperson might hit all the selling points, but in the customer's thought process, is that going to be compelling enough to get the sale? Which is more important, what the salesperson says or what the customer thinks about what the salesperson said? So once again, the inner game of selling is inner. It has to do with the customer's thought process, which is internal. Just like inner game of tennis has to do with the potential of the body, not judging, but how can we play up to our full potential? Don't worry about the score. That's going to take care of yourself if you play as best as you possibly can. Okay. Mm-hmm. Same thing. And in both cases, it has to do with ego interference. Okay. In tennis, and this is where we get into like more of the Zen implications. Because in tennis, the ego interference is I want to win. I want to be a champion. I want the ball to go in, not out. Okay, you're judging. And when you don't play up to those expectations, you're frustrated and you try to micromanage. You try to keep your arm straight, or you want to step in even harder, or you want to, a tennis stroke involves hundreds of subtle neuromuscular movements. For you to decide that you need to step into the ball more, and so you micromanage and step in more, it's going to be to the detriment of 50 other neuromuscular things that all need to be coordinated, that self two handles masterfully, but here self one is trying to micromanage, and it's not going to work. Similar to a salesperson who's trying to sell. Well, if a salesperson has 2 weeks to meet their quota and they're behind, as the customer, how are you going to feel of a salesperson who's trying to make up their entire quarter in 2 weeks and now they're talking to you? You're going to feel like the salesperson's being awfully pushy. They're over trying. You feel invisible. Okay. Same thing. And it's ego interference. So with tennis, you want to be the best and you're going to judge yourself as being good or bad. It's ego. In selling, you want to be able to take credit for what you said that made the customer change their mind or increase the influence. But remember, it's not about what you say. It's what the customer thinks. So in each case, and there are many inner game applications. Tim Gallaway wrote a book on skiing. He wrote a book on golf. Then he wrote a book on work, which is a bestseller. I'll get this one out. This is called The Intergame of Work. He wrote one on music. There's an intergame of teamwork, an intergame of leadership, many intergame applications. And, they all have to do with eliminating ego interference in a way. Like, for example, the intergame of teamwork. Okay. I've taken many intergame of teamwork classes. They're Tim in collaboration with Valerio Pescado. And once again, there's an individual mindset and there's a team mindset. And the individual mindset is about ego. I did my job. Okay, the team didn't accomplish the goal, but I did my job. Well, that's meaningless. The team didn't accomplish their goal. What if the team works together and no individual can take credit for their role, but the team got the job done? Once again, you've eliminated ego interference to achieve a better objective. Yeah.
Okay.
So with meditation, the difference with meditation and inner game is that inner game is for performing a particular task better. Okay. Whether it has to do with tennis or golf or teamwork or even, personal growth. Whereas meditation is more about inner peace. So it's pure feeling for the sake of feeling. And it's feeling peace. Now, again, you have the inner game and the outer game when it comes to peace. Okay. Like, you could have a peace treaty between two countries that really don't like each other. Think like Israel and Saudi Arabia or something, or Israel and Egypt, where there's a treaty. And so no one's going to war with each other. And you call that peace. Okay. That's outer peace. Really, that's lack of war. Inner peace is feeling an actual feeling of peace. Real peace is a feeling. And I would venture to say that, we're not really going to have world peace without inner peace, without everybody actually feeling peace within themselves. So that would be the difference between meditation and what we're talking about in terms of inner game. They're very parallel, similar concepts, but inner game is more for the performance. One thing that Tim Gallaway told me one time is that the inner game is really the outer game, and the outer game is really the inner game. In terms of when you're applying inner game, it's actually outer. So these different exercises I'm telling you about, the bounce hit exercise, notice the shape of your swing, notice the seams of the ball, that's all outer. It's not inner. If Tim said to a tennis player, you're being too judgmental and it's distracting you and interfering with your potential, that would be inner. He would be saying something that has to do with their inner thought process, but it wouldn't improve the player's performance because they would just be substituting one concept for another concept. Now, instead of I shouldn't judge, Tim told me I'm judging too much. So now I have to start judging, not judging anymore. And then you start judging whether you're judging too much and whether you stop judging and judging yourself for not judging instead of judging yourself for hitting the ball out. There's no improvement. The
Mm-hmm.
inner game is the outer game. It's applied differently than meditation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's a lot to take in. Yeah, but
Yeah.
especially the judging but not judging. No, I
Yeah.
definitely see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Judging the amount of judging you're doing is still judging.
mhm. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I understand it. It's a difficult you know thing because you might be trying to get the players into self two, but you're actually kind of getting them into self one, but in a different way. So and I think that comes
Exactly.
down to the awareness of the coach.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
yeah, because
Exactly.
yeah.
Hmm.
But I think maybe when you're coaching and you need to be coming from a place of self too, also, and
Hmm.
then hopefully some
Yes.
of those things won't
Yes.
won't come up.
Yes. The coach
So,
is the learner, not the teacher.
uh-huh. But I was also wondering, um, so for instance, how does the inner game work with ambition? Because in some ways they're paradoxical. For
Hmm.
instance, how can we want to achieve big goals?
Hmm.
For instance, we talked a little bit about like Wimbledon. Let's say they want
Hmm.
to be a Wimbledon champion, but at the same time, trying to achieve something is against what the inner game would be talking about. So, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. It's really not about, you know, winning Wimbledon would not be anti-inner game.
Hmm.
Okay. It would just be what it was. I mean, ambition, which is getting to a certain position or a certain rank, or in the terms of tennis, getting to a certain title, that's fine. It just needs to be incidental. Okay.
Hmm.
What you're aspiring toward really is to be your best, is the being the best that you can be. Now, what is that? What is your full potential and how can you realize that? Well, that has to be discovered. Okay. Uh, I was giving this tennis clinic once and I didn't realize it, but one of the students at the clinic was had a paralyzed left arm and left leg. Okay. And so I'm telling her, like, okay, take the racket back with two hands. And she didn't do it. And everybody else was doing it. She wasn't taking the racket back with two hands. And she's, well, I can't move my arm. Oh, one hand is just fine. Don't worry about it. The next week, she came to the lesson and she got so inspired about playing tennis that over the past week, I found out from her parents that's all she did was practice tennis. Even though she couldn't move her left hand arm, she learned to serve. Just being able to throw the ball up with the same hand that she was holding the racket. And she had a darn good serve. She was just playing the very best of her potential. She's never going to win Wimbledon, right?
Hmm.
But she was very satisfied with how she was doing in tennis. And it was a surprise to all of us. But she was playing her very best. And we just want to play as good as we could possibly play. Now I'm 70 years old. So here, I'm down to being a 4-5 player. So there's 5-0 players I used to be able to beat that now, really own me. They beat me. But I'm excited to be discovering the potential of in my 70s. I don't look at it as a shortcoming. I look at it as like, well, let me discover what's possible, what I can do with what I have. And so it keeps me playing competitively. So in tournaments to this day. So So my ambition, okay, I'm not going to win open tournaments anymore. Okay. My ambition is to play the best as I can as a 70-year-old tennis player. And I'm very passionate about it. And so my quality of life on the tennis court, my happiness, my satisfaction is very fulfilling. So
Hmm.
did I lose? And am I falling short on my ambition? Not really, because I'm doing the best as I can. And another thing about ambition, sometimes it could be blinding. Um, we have to be open to changing as we're changing. So we might want to be like president of the company, but then at some point, as we move up the ranks in the corporate ladder, we might find out that, this company, I've really kind of outgrown it.
Hmm.
And I would rather be in a different company that more suits me and be willing to make that change instead of being wedded to your original aspiration, your original ambition. You might want to change that. Just like, yeah, I was wanting to hit a flat forehand with an Eastern grip for a long time. I started with a continental grip, then I switched to an Eastern grip. But at some point, it's like, oh, you know what? Semi-Western grip with the topspin follow through is going to be even better. So I abandoned my flat forehand for a new one.
Hmm. Yes, I see. So, um, hmm, yeah, I'm just trying to take this all in. So ambition, perhaps it's not necessarily about ambition. It's about finding the best out of yourself, whatever that may be.
And that's an
Correct.
ambition. That's an inner ambition
Hmm.
as opposed to
So,
the outer ambition.
so inner ambition would be in alignment with the inner game.
Yes.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah.
And could that inner ambition be applied to, let's say, being the best tennis player? Because that does seem a bit outer. Is it so? For instance, you would say, "I want to be the best tennis player I can be,"
Hmm.
or could you say that I want to be better than other people? That seems like outer ambition. But let's say you wanted to be the
Exactly.
best tennis player you
Yeah.
could be. That could be inner ambition.
Right. Exactly. I want to be the best tennis player that I could be. I want to live up to my full potential as a tennis player. Okay.
Hmm.
That's inner ambition. And it's very fulfilling. It also has to do with how much we're enjoying tennis, right?
Hmm.
If we want to beat everybody and sometimes we lose, we're not necessarily happy as a tennis player. I mean, a lot of up and coming junior players with a lot of potential get burnt out because they're disappointed with not being able to beat everybody, you
Hmm.
know. And, we've seen tennis players that, in the juniors, they didn't have like the best rankings. And, all of a sudden when they go into the pros, actually they do really, really well. So, it's just a matter of discovering what your potential is. Yeah, like Yannick Sinner, wasn't great. It wasn't the best junior in the world, but now he's doing incredible.
Hmm.
Okay. Uh, you just don't know. But if he got frustrated saying, I'm not beating enough junior players here, I'm not doing enough in the tournaments, so I'm going to give up, he would never have discovered his true potential.
Hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. And so for some of us, our true potential might be to win Wimbledon. For some of us, it might be to win a futures tournament. For some of us, it might be to win an open tournament. You
Yeah.
know, but we
Hmm.
don't we don't. But I think whatever that may be, if we're at that potential, I think it would be satisfying because
Mhm.
everybody has a different measuring stick. Everybody has a different, value and
Mhm.
also a different situation.
Very much
So,
so. And you have
mhm,
to discover your measuring stick,
mhm,
not listen to other people prescribing what you should be doing. Discover it for
mhm,
yourself. And the best way to do that is to notice what feels right, what's
mhm.
fulfilling for you.
Uh-huh. And okay, so I think maybe this could be a good final question. You're an excellent example of how the inner game can be applied to the business world and the tennis world. And I would like you to talk about how the inner game has aided your success and in many different aspects of life, from the tennis side to the business side.
Right. Well, it was just my passion that when, as a tennis player, I read Tim Galloway's book and discovered a better way to approach tennis, that I could both enjoy tennis more and be a better tennis player at the same time.
Hmm.
Integrating with a lot of similar principles of my meditation practice, I was just dedicated to this being a better way to approach something. And I was passionate about it. And it affected all different aspects of my life. I really made an effort to spend as much time with Tim as possible, to learn from, he's very, the wisdom is incredible, spending time with him. And then being able to take that into my professional career as a salesperson and working my way up the ranks to be vice president of the company. What happened is I used inner game principles to notice what changes I needed to make as a professional. First as a salesperson, and then I was a sales coach for the company, where eventually I was able to become vice president because I could see how the company needs to respond to certain things. I noticed the salespeople were the ones in the company that had the direct contact with the customers. And so whenever there was a trend, our company would find out first and be able to respond, because we were always listening to the salespeople. And I was encouraging salespeople to be observant as possible. Learn from your customers. What are they noticing uh, in terms of trends, in terms of challenges that they're facing, and bring it back to the rest of the company so we can respond to changes in the industry. And that's how the company became very successful. Sales increased tenfold, 10 times, once I started applying inner game principles to uh, to the company, to selling. So overall, I would say if there's any one thing I could point to, it's being willing to be the learner rather than the teacher at all times.
Hmm. Willing to be the learner instead of the teacher. Wow. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And then you're sort of in that same. It seems like that's the same frame of mind when it comes to realizing the sound of the ball, the
Hmm.
the bounce hit,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
how does this feel, on your
Hmm.
racket or within your body, because then you're almost taking things in, observing. It's almost like
Yes.
you're listening and not talking. But then once you're
Hmm.
listening, then you can see
Hmm.
what it is that you need to do,
Yeah.
whether it be on the tennis court or in other facets of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. No. I mean, I think that's really really powerful. Well, I think it's been a good talk. We
Yeah,
don't want to
Bryce.
be
Thanks.
we don't want to be here all day. Um,
Right.
but
Good.
I really really appreciate you coming on here, Jeffrey, and I appreciate all the insights you've not only given me, but our potential audience that's going to be out there. So I really appreciate this talk, And so this has been another tennis improvement video. Like, comment, subscribe, and as always, great luck out there in the tennis court. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Bryce.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.